Do you remember Uncharted 4's multiplayer? I feel like I hardly hear anyone talk about this multiplayer game, even during the game's release. Why is that? Hi there, this is Puddin02, and today we're going to be talking about Uncharted 4's multiplayer mode. So a couple days ago, I was going over the games I played during the past couple of years, and Uncharted 4 came to my mind, specifically the multiplayer mode. Uncharted 4 was released for the PS4 in 2016 to critical acclaim for its story and visuals, but no one talks about its multiplayer mode, which was fantastic in my opinion. So I asked myself, why is that? For those of you who weren't aware, Uncharted 4 did indeed launch with the multiplayer mode on day 1. So it's not like other single-player games like GTA, where the multiplayer mode launched a month after the main game was released. Uncharted 4's multiplayer consisted of various 5v5 modes such as Team Deathmatch, Capture the Flag, King the Hill, and so on. The game looks very generic on its surface, as it looks to be a typical third-person shooter, but for those of you who have played it, you know there was so much more chaotic fun underneath the surface. The most immediate difference is that the game's characters can swing, vault, and climb on walls, just like Nathan Drake can during the single-player mode. This makes for some insanely fun maps with a lot of verticality. Though the game's characters do not differ in stats or attributes, they can be highly customized through the game's perks and purchasable mechanics. For example, if you prefer to play a more support type playstyle, you have many options to choose from to tailor your character to that role, such as Helping Hand perk, which allows you to revive your falling allies with faster speed or to full health if you opt in for the level 3 perk. If you prefer to play a more stealthy playstyle, you can opt in for the Ghost perk, which makes it so your character makes less noise, or the Silent Assassin perk, which makes it so your opponent's teammates are not notified when you're down your opponent. If you prefer to be aggressive, you can opt in for the Brawler perk, and if you prefer to be tanky, you can opt in for the Down but Not Out perk. Point being, there are many playstyles, and the best part is you can mix and match however you like. You can be an aggressive support carrying a shotgun, all while reviving your falling allies once the fight is over, or play a flanking scout as you mark and kill your opponents for your teammates to make the frontline push. You can make all the adjustments you want in the loadout menu, and the examples I gave you aren't the only things you can customize for your characters. You can add in what are called purchasables. See, throughout a match, you can earn points for downing enemies, reviving allies, and other means, and these points can be used to purchase upgrades or new tools. For example, you can buy the Wrath of Eldorado Mystical, that summons ghosts and attacks enemies within its radius. There are others, such as Spirit of the Jinn, that increases your speed, the Path of Indra to teleport you, which has the coolest teleportation animation by the way. There are other mysticals, but you get the picture. These purchasables give your characters superhuman abilities that are fun to pull off as they are cool to see. You can also buy heavy weapons such as RPGs, heavy machine guns, but those are very self-explanatory. I feel like I've hardly ever seen anybody use those except for the China Lake grenade launcher. These weapons are stronger than the regular weapons, but I don't think they're worth the price and loadout points. No, what I use my loadout points for the very last type of purchasable, my favorite one, the sidekicks.
I need backup.
Sure.
No worries. Come on, man. Pick me up.
In Uncharted 4's multiplayer, you can summon psychics to assist you in battle through various means. The most straightforward example is the Brute, which attacks the enemy team, all while heavily pressuring them. Again, you could opt in for a more support-type playstyle and summon a medic who automatically runs to the nearest down teammate and revives them to full health, all while supplying your team with ammo and speeding up the cooldown of their gear abilities. The hunter tracks down your opponents and grabs them in the chokehold, leaving them vulnerable to attacks. And lastly, there's the sniper sidekick who snipes down the enemy below. I don't know why, but I love playing with sidekicks in Uncharted 4's multiplayer. They make the game stand out in my opinion. I don't know many other multiplayer games that uses a psychic-like system like this game does, so if there are any other games that you know that uses a very similar system, please let me know. This psychic system gives the game a much more epic feeling, as the battlefield could be packed with multiple players and their psychics all waging war against each other. Oh, and did I mention you can also customize each individual psychic and mystical? That's right, each one of these purchasables can equip a perk that can further complement your playstyle. You can make it so your hunter is immune to explosive stuns, so now there's no stopping him from coming at you except your aiming skills. How about a Brute with much greater accuracy? Not only is he putting pressure on the enemy team, he is now downing them one by one. As for the mysticals, Have it so the ghosts from the Wrath of Eldorado do double damage or mark the enemy as they attack. There is so much customization. It's great, guys. So great, now I'm sure many of you are going to the PlayStation Store to download the game, right? Well, I don't recommend it. The game's player base has dwindled so badly since its heyday back in 2016 that there are some modes in which you just can't find a single player to play it with. I'm looking at you, Plunder. It's too late to play this game now because it's nearly 10 years old. So why am I gushing about its multiplayer? Because it deserves it. The developers of this game put so much thought and effort into the gameplay and visuals for what is essentially a multiplayer add-on. Remember everyone, Uncharted 4 is first and foremost a single-player story-driven game, but the developers did not half-ass the multiplayer add-on. The amount of work they put into this multiplayer add-on is more than some multiplayer-only games. That was the standard for the games back in the PS3 and Xbox 360 generation. For games to feel like a complete package, they should have engaging single-player and multiplayer modes. Uncharted 4 came out during the PS4, Xbox One generation, and that was the generation where we transitioned to having games be either one or the other. So it was one of the last few games that had both offerings. So back to my initial question at the beginning of this video. Why does no one talk about Uncharted 4's multiplayer? Well, I came to a few theories. First, I think people came into this game looking for a single player experience and probably assumed that the game's multiplayer would be half-assed. I personally know many people who did not even bother with the multiplayer after they beat the story. Second, I think the game is just not good in high-level competitive environment. I don't know how many Uncharted 4 tournaments there were, but I do remember watching one years ago and being bored to death watching it. Both teams were just camping waiting for the other side to make a move. And unfortunately, there's nothing in the game's mechanics that punishes this type of playstyle. The multiplayer in this game is definitely more archaic, but in a good way. It's not so wacky where it feels like you're going through the motions. You still have power and agency to influence the game, but we know there are sweaty players that will always find the most optimal and strategic way to win, so if that means to camp, then that will be the meta. Lastly, I think the game's multiplayer came out in a really bad time. I remember playing Star Wars Battlefront and Call of Duty Black Ops 3 leading up to this game's release. Both of these games had very well received multiplayer modes, and not just that, but Overwatch was released a couple weeks after Uncharted 4. Overwatch, a multiplayer-only game that won Game of the Year that year. Uncharted 4 multiplayer did not stand a chance to leave an impact. Having said this, I firmly believe that if Uncharted 4's multiplayer had released during the PS3 era or even early on in the PS4 era, I think it would have been remembered more fondly. If you loved Uncharted's Lost Legacy collection in the PS5, then you would have loved the multiplayer mode in this game. It plays exactly the same, but with all the extra bells and whistles I mentioned earlier. I made this video not only to ask why Uncharted 4's multiplayer isn't remembered often, but to also pay tribute. I get the feeling that developers did this as a labor of love and not just for the paycheck. So for the developers watching this, thank you. I had so many great memories and will always look back on this game with more nostalgia.